It's not the Republicans and Democrats who are actually competing for the White House or the House on the Hill. It's the people versus the corporate world.
To do more. This was the basic legal structure for the consumer environment and worker safety movements. And it started in 1966 with the auto and highway safety laws, and it went up to the early 70s. And with few exceptions, listen to this, there hasn't been a single major piece of legislation advancing the health, safety, and economic rights of the American people since 1974, arguably since 1976. That's the effect of money in politics. That's the effect of a totally subservient strategy by the liberals. And in your book, The Death of the Liberal Class, which you really wrote as an understatement, they have sabotaged any kind of counterattack to the Powell Memorandum and the corporate.
Almost every avenue from which we get our information in the mainstream media is controlled by only 6 corporations that have one specific interest: profit. News censorship is happening every day, but not necessarily from the top down blacking out the stories, but also in the form of self-censorship, framing, backpaging, all to protect the interests of those corporate conglomerates. So who are the big 6 corporations that control nearly everything you see, hear, and read? First, there's Comcast, formerly owned by GE, which controls MSNBC, NBC, and Telemundo. And there's Disney, which owns ABC, the History Channel, and and ESPN. Next, Viacom, the parent company of MTV, Paramount, and BET. CBS, with all its affiliates. And there's News Corp, which owns Fox News, the New York Post, and the Wall Street Journal. And finally, Time Warner, the parent company of CNN, Time, and People magazine, as well as Warner Brothers. So what impact does it have when an agency that's supposed to serve as a watchdog for the powerful becomes a lapdog for the powerful? To break down some of the most egregious cases of censorship and conflicts of interest in the corporate media, BTS producer Manuel Rapalo.
Hi, Abby. How's it going?
Hi, what's going on? So,
Good.
you know, when I think of the top-down censorship, kind of the hand of the corporation blacking out a story, 2 cases come to mind that are the most egregious. The first one was News Corp. Fox News was going to air a story on the bovine growth hormone, BGH, bovine growth hormone, of course, another Monsanto case of censorship where they were invested in Monsanto for advertising, and their boss said no when a team of Fox investigative reporters wanted to cover this story. Monsanto threatened the station, sent them a letter saying there will be dire consequences, this is a direct quote, dire consequences for Fox News if the story is aired, and I wanted to play what happened when they confronted their boss about this.
I said, you know, this is news. This is important. This is stuff people need to know. And I'll never forget, he didn't pause a beat, and he said, we just paid $3 billion for these television stations. We'll tell you what the news is. The news is what we say it is.
So really, I mean, you know, you look at this case, and it's such an egregious case of censorship, and really he's saying, we'll tell you what the news is. The news is whatever we want it to be. The news is whatever our advertisers want it to be.
No, it's not just, when it comes to the media, really, it's not just the parent companies. It's also your corporate sponsors. It's also the people that are putting out the ads. I mean, Monsanto, had this story actually aired, would have probably pulled their advertisement for Roundup, for aspartame, and all those other products that again aren't tested, but advertise all over Fox News. And it's really interesting that you point out this story, because the reporters and that guy that you just played, they actually countersued against Fox under Florida's whistleblower statute. And as it turns out, under Florida law, they lost that lawsuit because turns out it's not illegal to falsify the news. So, I mean, that really should give you an idea of how dangerous this is and how powerful Monsanto is. Like, they've been doing this for...
Yeah, they've been doing this for the past 10 years. Once again, another labeling issue. You know, research organizations in the country about censorship in the media did a study where they found that 118 people only sit on 288 corporate boards that unify kind of this media conglomerate and corporate America. So you have people involved in Kraft Foods, Monsanto, so many different things, defense corporations, the pharmaceutical industry, lobbying together, all sitting on these boards, and it really is such a small amount of people really controlling all these things from the top down.
It's 6
What were some
corporations.
of the most shocking things that you found in terms of just conflicts of interest?
I was looking at this, and when we're looking at conflict of interest, there's two things that really need to be pointed out. It's not just corporations. A lot of execs that sit in corporations and you said it in your introduction, they're sitting on, for example, NBC, Citigroup, Exxon, Philip Morris. Their execs sit on board of directors for Philip Morris. That's not okay. CBS has board members sitting in Walmart, General Dynamics. These are drone manufacturers. The execs for CBS are the same guys that are sitting in the board of directors for drone manufacturers?
And I think,
how is that okay?
And I think when people think of the corporate media, they're like, oh, well, of course, the corporate media, but really, we're talking about NPR and PBS as well. I mean, NPR was running a story during the BP oil spill featuring a scientist that was talking about how oil was in the Gulf that would bacteria that would eat the oil. It was like, well, this bacteria is just going to clean up the oil itself. We don't have to worry about anything. Turns out later, according to Greg Palast, the scientist interviewed about the story was given $500 million, $500 million
exactly.
from BP. NPR never mentioned this detail, this quaint detail, when they were doing the story, and of course we saw PBS.
The thing about that, the money.
For simply trying to enter the presidential debates. I mean, what was going through your mind at this time where you're just thinking, wow, is there anything that proves more that we do not live in a democracy than what's happening to me right now, just trying to get my voice heard?
My running mate and I were the only two people in this secret dark site. They had this converted, I don't remember what it was. It was a very large facility, and there were, Sherry had counted them, I didn't, but according to her, there were about 16 Secret Service and police who were around us in this huge, warehouse, and it was only us, and then one other person who was brought in.
We were very dangerous.
We were very dangerous. The whole thing was so absurd,
It's so surreal.
Ohio sold Lake Erie Correctional Institution to Corrections Corporation of America for $72 million. It was the first state prison in the nation to be sold to a for-profit company.
You would expect that they would come in and they would know what they were doing.
It was the one place he didn't want to go.
Inmates constantly high, constantly intoxicated. You can only cut so many things before the security starts to diminish. Serious internal problems.
Crack, you could get heroin, you could get pot, they were making hooch.
Duffel bags coming over the fence. The more you put in, the less you get out.
At the expense of prisoners and their families.
Ben is going to come back out no further along than the day he was sent in there.
You're in the business to make a profit. Do you want those people rehabilitated? They've learned probably to be better criminals in prison than what they were when they went in.
Where is the responsibility for taking proper care of that individual?
And they are there to make sure that their shareholders are happy at the end of the day.
The bottom line is, we are failing.
Let's talk about the symptoms of our society and our system that we live under. What are the symptoms that you see that designate and that indicate that we live in a very sick society right now and that the system is corrupt to the core?
You could start with the fact that we're very sick physically, medically. We are very sick. We have very high rates of heart disease, cancer, high blood pressure, obesity, diabetes, you name it. By any indicator, we are physically very sick. And our longevity is actually declining. We are one of the few societies in which survival is actually going down. Death rates are rising, particularly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As we've seen in recent studies, and as some of our witnesses have testified today, private student loans carry high interest rates. They're difficult to restructure, and in many cases, they have created a barrier for people trying to buy their first homes. And that's why I was surprised that a federal home loan bank has been making available an $8.5 billion line of credit to the nation's largest private student loan company, Sallie Mae. The federal home loan banks were established to expand home ownership, but now it seems that they are undermining that goal by helping finance more student loan debt. In addition, the federal home loan banks get extraordinarily cheap access to capital thanks to government sponsorship, and that cheap capital was provided to Sallie Mae. And let's be specific on this. Sallie Mae has been getting this line of credit for 1/3 of 1% interest. and then turning around and lending money to students at a rate about 20 times higher than that. So yesterday I sent a letter to FHFA Acting Director Ed DeMarco because he regulates the Federal Home Loan Banks. But you're all experts.
Her to bed, and a lot in between.
For 2 years, I've been screening my calls. Any number that I don't recognize, I don't answer.
Because why? Because it might be one of these people.
Because it might be a bill collector, right? It might be one of the loan companies.
You're such a big girl.
The calls she's avoiding are from companies trying to collect on Moss's overdue student loan payments.
They treat you like you're trying to be sneaky and be deceitful, and like I'm hiding some Swiss bank account that I'm not giving them access to, and that's not the case at all. If I had the money, I would pay them. There just isn't any money.
Moss currently owes about $1,000 a month in payments. That's more than a third of her gross salary as a social worker, so payments are always hard. But a few weeks ago, in the middle of this deepening recession,
and how much have you been able to pay off, and how much
when I walked out of dental school, I was $136,000 in debt, and I have paid in close to $100,000 right now. They say I owe $300,000. So I still have quite a bit, obviously, that I can't manage anymore. And I've done everything I can to try to manage it, but it becomes unmanageable at a certain point.
Isaiah? Well, Don and Melinda, I still can't believe this one, but it is just mind-blowing. This is a story that will likely outrage you and leave you wondering, why are the resources of the federal government being used this way? Joining me live is Paul Aker. He had a student loan debt from 1987. The loan was $1,500. Last Thursday, 7 people in combat gear with automatic weapons showed up at his home and took him to jail for a 29-year-old student loan. Those people were U.S. Marshals, Deputy U.S. Marshals right here in Houston. Also joining us is U.S. Congressman Gene Green. Paul, when these people arrived at your front door, what did you think? There is a U.S. Marshal Service knocking on your door for a $1,500 student loan.
I was wondering, why are you here? I'm home. I haven't done anything. And why are the marshals knocking on my door? It's amazing.
Now, you were arrested. You were in shackles. You were in handcuffs. And where did they take you?
They took me downtown to the federal court, where they put me in a 4x4 cell for about an hour. And then an hour later, I was taken before a judge, surrounded by 7 marshals.
For a payment agreement?
For a payment
agreement. Of that for a payment agreement?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was just totally mind-boggling. I just couldn't believe that I'm standing before the court with no rights read to me, no legal representation, and I'm being told that I owe $1,500 and just couldn't believe it.
Congressman Gene Green, what do you make of this?
Well, there's bound to be a better way to collect on a student loan debt that's so old. Now, again, the interest is accrued on it. So, but still, using 7 U.S. Marshals, you didn't receive any kind of notice. No certified mail, nobody coming out and saying this is the debt you owe.
Nothing in 30 years, almost 30 years.
You know, our federal resources, our U.S. Marshals and the federal court system are being used, I think, by the private sector. A few years ago, Congress allowed the private sector to contract for student loan collections. And so you have these private companies who are doing this. You told me that it wasn't a U.S. attorney that was there. It was actually a private attorney standing in place of the U.S.
bill collector.
A bill collector.
We're out of time, guys. I want to thank you guys for coming on. But once again, we want to remind the public, I was told by sources with the U.S. Marshal Service, they have 1,200 to 1,500 more arrests right here in our community that they will make for old student loan debt.
Presidential nominee, Dr. Jill Stein. Good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Great to be here.
So that sounds great, you know, helping millennials getting out of debt in terms of their college debt. But how do you pay for that?
Same way we paid for the bankers. We bailed out the guys on Wall Street who actually crashed the economy with their waste, fraud, and abuse. And
so
how
you're
did we
talking
do
about
that?
an $800 billion program? I mean, so again, how do you pay for it?
Well, actually, you know, if you count the quantitative easing for the bankers, that was an additional $4.5 trillion, which is far more than what we need for student debt, which is about $1.3 trillion. So, you know, we did a quantitative easing.
Though, was from the Federal Reserve. So are you asking, are you saying that the Federal Reserve should pay for this?
Well, no, you don't pay for it. The Federal Reserve basically cancels the debt. It doesn't cost taxpayers 1 penny. And the reason it's good to do it for students is that it actually expands the economy. It's the stimulus package of our dreams to put to work a whole generation of young people that's held hostage in debt, that's working 2 or 3 part-time, temporary, low-wage jobs, not doing what their passion is, what their skills are, what they've been trained to do. So this is the stimulus package of our dreams, unlike the bailout for Wall Street, which just allowed more of the gambling as usual. So that didn't really strengthen our economy. On the other hand, bailing out a generation that's been basically hung out to dry is exactly what we need to get our economy going again.
Dr. Stein, you say that quantitative easing is the way that you would do this, but a lot of economists say that drives up inflation, that it encourages debt, that it actually threatens the U.S. dollar, and countries typically use this when there's really no other option. You really think that the student debt crisis is to that level that we would use this?
Well, they're absolutely right when you're talking about bailing out banks, who just essentially use that bailout to do more of that gambling at taxpayers' expense.
But they did pay the bailout back, Dr. Stein. The banks have paid back the U.S. government.
Yes, but, took a while to do that.
Right, but they paid it back.
They paid back that $800 billion TARP plan. That's what they paid back. They didn't pay back the quantitative easing, which was simply a cancellation of the debt. And that is inflationary when you expand the money supply without creating more productivity in the economy. And actually, economists are pretty much in agreement that if you do that for student debt, that is the stimulus package that our economy actually needs.
But Dr. Stein, you talk about these students as if they were hoodwinked. I mean, it's public knowledge what you're paying to go to college, and it's a personal choice and decision that you're going to pay $250,000 to go get a degree that then you can't get a job.
And that was exactly
it absolves people of personal responsibility. But again, whatever happened to individual responsibility in this country?
Excuse me, I would like to have a chance to answer. I think I'm here for an interview. Thank you very much. That's exactly the point, because young people were lured into these loans with the promise that there would be jobs. But what happened in 2008? Wall Street crashed the economy, so they basically reneged on their end of the deal. So we have young people who are going to college with the expectation of jobs. But what kind of jobs have been created? There's no question the jobs that have come back are massively jobs that are low-wage, part-time, and temporary.
Actually, why should the government be in the business of offering all of this free stuff? As Dagan says, this is a personal responsibility. If you want to go to a certain college, the choices that you make, why should the government be in the business of giving out college, health care, all of this free stuff? Is that your position on the economy? Government?
It's not government. We, as a society, are part of creating a world we can live in. Right now, young people have become the latest cash cow in a predatory economy. And what have they been deprived of? The ability to get an education, the ability to get a job, and the ability to have a climate in which they can live in the future. Right now, the science is telling us. This is the latest study, actually, announced by NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, called the Oh My God study, which is that we can now expect as much as 9 feet of sea level rise by 2050. So you have a generation that is up in arms. What is it that re-envisions our economy each generation? It has to be the young people. But right now, they can't get jobs. They cannot afford education. This is not a world that works for all of us. No society has ever survived by devouring its younger generation.
Well, so
that is exactly what our economy is doing
on
right
regulation?
Now.
Because many businesses will argue that the reason that they're not hiring and adding more positions to the payroll is because Obamacare is killing them, because the regulatory environment is such.
I agree. We agree about Obamacare, because Obamacare was basically a boondoggle for insurance companies and pharmaceutical companies. So there's $500 billion every year that we are paying into paper pushing, into guaranteed predatory profits for these industries. These are bills. I live in the state of Massachusetts. We used to call Obamacare
Romneycare before it was Obamacare. It was essentially written behind closed doors by the insurance industry and the pharmaceutical industry. That's who's making out like bandits here. And taxpayers and businesses and everyday people are paying to the teeth for these stripped down, streamlined policies that don't actually cover you when you get sick. You may know I'm a medical doctor, in fact, so I know this well from the inside, that we are not being adequately covered by our health care. So what we need is a Medicare for all system. Right now we pay a health care tax, but we don't call it a tax.
Right, exactly.
It's a death by 1,000 cuts. It's premiums, copays, and insurance payments
Dr.
that
Stein,
are actually
before
robbing
you
us
go,
blind.
I just want to say, I just want to get really encapsulate what your campaign is about, because you've got a lot of competition, obviously. Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders supporters you're trying to get. What is your fix to create jobs and move the economy in terms of economic growth?
Great. So, I'm the one candidate that doesn't accept money and is not corrupted by lobbyists,
Is that going to create
by
jobs?
corporations, and by super PACs. You know, I'm saying I actually have the unique liberty to do what it is that the American people need. And the American people actually are clamoring for an emergency jobs program, which will also solve the emergency of climate change. We are calling for a Green New Deal, like the New Deal that got us out of the Great Depression. It not only revives the economy, it prevents catastrophic climate change, and it makes the wars for oil obsolete, which, mind you, is costing you 54% of our discretionary budget, which is half of your income tax right now, is going for these trillion-dollar wars, which are making us more endangered, not more safe. They've created failed states, mass refugee migrations, and worse terrorist threats. Yet every American household is paying an average of $75,000 per household for these outrageous wars, which are not making us more safe, they're making us less safe. So by doing the right thing for the American people, because I'm not held hostage by anybody's large campaign donations, I can actually provide the solutions that the American people need.
Dr. Stein, thanks so much for joining us.
You know, if the U.S. isn't an empire, has there ever been an empire? You know, if you look at the portion of our budget, so it's like over 50, I think it's like 55% now of our discretionary budget, which is spent on the military. We have bases, you know, too numerous and too secret to be counted, but it's thought to be in at least 50, 60, 80, maybe 100 countries, and perhaps over 1,000 of them around the world. So no country has ever had that, ever in history. We have spent in the last 14 years $6 trillion, that's $75,000 per household that has gone into this endless war that we are conducting as this empire.
For people who don't really know the historical context of how the New Deal was actually...
Those of my fellow countrymen who are dogmatic about Assad demonization are not going to like what I have to say now, which is that the Syrian government is popular, and for that reason, it is winning the war. The Battle of Aleppo will probably be decided soon, relatively soon, and maybe the last hurrah, in my opinion, of the foreign mercenaries. The president is popular. His government is recognized as legitimate by the UN. It contests and wins elections. The elections are monitored. There's a parliament which contains opposition parties. We met them. There is a significant nonviolent opposition which is trying to work constructively for its own social vision. Some of it is inside the government, which in effect is a government of national unity. Some of it is in the parliament. We met them. The Minister of Reconciliation, as I think some of us have said, deals directly with armed groups, and he's an opposition leader. So let me conclude, which is that the U.S. policy on Syria, regime change, is not wrong in its details. It is wrong in its fundamentals. It is wrong root and branch. It violates the UN Charter. It violates international law. The U.S. is bombing parts of Syria without the consent of a legitimate government. That violates international law. The sanctions violate international law. I won't dwell on it because Marilyn and Donna have already discussed that. I think out of our trip flow certain tasks. I think it is the task of the U.S. anti-war movement to unite around a different vision than what it has united around thus far. Thus far, it has united around a feeble vision that is partly false, that partly accepts the dominant State Department corporate media narrative. We must directly and forthrightly challenge U.S. policy if we are to shift U.S. public opinion. Some organizations, alas, buy into the dominant mainstream media narrative. They have not covered themselves in glory by so doing. This is a dangerous moment. Without mentioning names, one of apparently the leading candidate for president is surrounded by military advisors who are talking about no-fly zones, which means air war against the Syrian Air Force and the Russians, or boots on the ground, which means U.S. invasion. If we're not frightened by that talk, we should be frightened by that talk. This is a dangerous moment. We have to change the basic U.S. policy. We need to have a different kind of anti-war movement.
Largest supplies of oil. And so it's time for the United States to start thinking of Iraq as a business opportunity. Iraq is projected to grow faster than China in the next 2 years. Now, I'm very excited about what's possible, and I'm very hopeful about
part of the bombing campaign. We're helping them choose targets, and we are refueling the Saudi bombers that are dropping the bombs. It is said that thousands of civilians have died in Yemen because of this. Yes, we need to have a debate over this, and I don't know what the president will do, but he ought to come to Congress and ask for permission. We've given him no authority to get involved in the civil war in Yemen, and we have to ask the bigger question, is this making it better or worse? Are there more refugees or less? Is there more chaos or less chaos with Saudi Arabia bombing into Yemen? So yeah, it's a debate we ought to have, and no president should unilaterally have this authority without the approval of Congress.
So for you, this is a moral issue, because you know there's a lot of jobs at stake. Certainly, if a lot of these defense contractors stop selling warplanes, other sophisticated equipment to Saudi Arabia, there's going to be a significant loss of jobs or revenue here in the United States. That's secondary from your. You know, there's a lot of jobs at stake. Certainly, if a lot of these defense contractors stop selling warplanes, other sophisticated equipment to Saudi Arabia, there's going to be a significant loss of jobs or revenue here in the United States. That's secondary from your standpoint. A moral issue, because you know there's a lot of jobs at stake. Certainly, if a lot of these defense contractors stop selling warplanes, other sophisticated equipment to Saudi Arabia, there's going to be a significant loss of jobs and revenue here in the United States. That's secondary from your standpoint.
Bernie Sanders is proposing this jobs program, which is great. It's going to propose millions of jobs for workers. You're saying full employment right now for everyone willing and capable.
We call our program a Green New Deal, and it transforms the economy. It greens the economy, not only our energy system, but also our food and our transportation, and it provides essential infrastructure and restores ecosystems. So those are basically the focus of it. But it means everybody gets a job. Everybody who's capable and willing to work gets a full-time living wage job, greening the economy. And that means 100% renewable energy by 2030, so that we actually succeed in solving the climate crisis at the same time. We don't have to be the empire patrolling the world anymore, let alone the world's policemen. We can put our resources back into creating jobs and a livable climate right here at home, which is the source of true security.